The Bear Essentials podcast gives older bears a place to gather for real talk regarding topics and issues that they can relate to. Here at The Bear Essentials, we aren't just having conversations. We are looking to provide actionable intelligence through real-life experience and expertise of our guests. Our mission is to build a strong community that elevates and motivates people to go beyond their limiting beliefs by helping them realize that getting older is not an excuse to hibernate on their goals, but a reason to work harder.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. I'm your host, Charles Wallace. Imagine waking up in a hospital's burn unit in Vancouver, British Columbia, having experienced second and third degree burns over 40% of your body. Now, fast forward. Imagine surviving that and all of the adversity associated with it, to then return to that place, Vancouver, British Columbia, lacing up the skates and taking the ice for your first game in the NHL for the Vancouver Canucks. Today's guest, Aaron Volpatti. His story is so inspirational, and his book, Fighter, Defying the NHL Odds, is an absolute must read. So please, without further ado, let's jump right into my interview with Aaron Volpatti. Hey, Aaron, how you doing? Thanks for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Charles. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man, it's my pleasure. I have started reading your book. I know we'll get into it a little bit, but having a chance to have you on, especially this time of year as people start to get into like New Year's and all that, I thought it would be great. So would you mind introducing yourself to the audience?
Yeah. So I'm Aaron Volpatti. I'm a cognitive performance coach, former NHL player, burn survivor, speaker, and recently author. So hope, like you said, hope you enjoy the book. And I think the message has been well received. It's been out for a couple months now, or just under. And yeah, the feedback has been really, really cool to see. So
yeah, I discovered your book probably about a week and a half ago, and I was just, dropped it on my Kindle, and I was blown away by just the story. And then I honestly, when I reached out to you and you said, sure, let's do it, I was really, really happy because I think a story like yours, a message like yours, I think more people need to hear it. So hopefully we'll be able to help inspire some people. So Aaron, you grew up, from what I read and what I've so far, you grew up in British Columbia, correct?
Yeah, a small little ski town called Revelstoke, BC, a town of, less than 10,000 people. And yeah, I mean, fun fact, it's actually the tallest vertical ski hill in North America. And they get I'm 2 hours west of that now. That's where I live, around where I played junior hockey. But yeah, they get 60 plus feet of snow a year there. So it's pretty winter wonderland, and the ski hill is pretty cool. For if anyone's an avid skier, I'd recommend just checking it out if you ever want to make a trip. It's pretty world renowned skiing. So yeah, grew up there. So,
and I honestly, from being from Canada, right? I know hockey here, it's not as big. I mean, I grew up in Philadelphia. We had hockey, but it was more roller skates as opposed to ice. But for you growing up, I mean, hockey, was that pretty much the thing? All the kids, is that what everybody was doing and wanted to do?
Yeah, it's definitely part of the culture. It's just something I think every kid just tries, right? And most keep playing, right? It's just what you do as a kid. You're like, hey, when are you going to start hockey, kind of thing? And so yeah, I was on skates at 4 years old, and never looked back, I guess you could say. But yeah, to answer your question, it's just a way of life here. So did it from a young age.
So when did you, I mean, being young, and obviously it's a culture, it's a way of life up there in Canada. I mean, when did you start to think like, you know what, I want to pursue this further? Maybe not the NHL, but at least maybe college, whatnot. When did that start to kind of become more of a reality for you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of my story, as I think you've either read or you're continuing to read, is that I mean, I was never supposed to play pro hockey. an above average minor hockey player, but I got cut from select teams and played house hockey. And I mean, for the listeners, that's like kind of the lowest level of minor hockey is house hockey, right? At 14 years old. So, I'd say like around that time, if I was like, man, if I could just get a scholarship, to the NCAA, like that was my NHL. So I would say from probably like 13, 14 years old, I didn't want to be naive. I knew I wasn't that good. So I knew I wasn't going to play pro hockey. Obviously, there's more to the story and I did, but yeah, at the time I set out to go get a scholarship and that's what I did. And so I had to make those, just sneak into junior hockey and then, yeah, ended up sneaking into, to the NCAA, obviously years later, but yeah, probably around 13, 14.
So, title your book Fighter for multiple reasons, as we'll talk about. But just from a hockey perspective, I know like you even mentioned about, in hockey, obviously one of the sports where fighting is a part of the sport. When did that part was that to you like, you know what? I can do this kind of aspect of it to give me more of a chance. Was that your thought process with it?
Yeah, a little bit of that. I mean, it more came from, so I could always skate and I could always hit. I loved to hit from a young age. I was a tiny kid, so I had a lot of injuries, but yeah, I had a knack for it. I was good at it, and I really liked that part of the game, the physicality piece. And so when I got to junior hockey, I knew, and it was, enforced through my dad and my coaches, like, hey, you want to play like this, you're going to have to learn how to fight. Because people are going to come after you. The game is a lot different. This is 20 years ago. And I mean, I think you're seeing it come back into the game. It seems like a little more now, but that's a different conversation. So I mean, my family has a boxing background. So I grew up and I had a little bit of experience through that. I think that, maybe I didn't really hesitate for a second to think like, oh, fighting, I was okay with it. And I was decent at it once it came around. So, but yeah, it was more at the time. I mean, going to that strictly the fighter. I mean, in the NHL when that came years later, that was when I'm like, all right, I ain't gonna make it doing the other. So let's do this. In junior hockey, it was more, as a result of my game and the way I played, people would come after me, right? So,
well, yeah, and I mean, from what I can tell, it didn't seem like you were too you wouldn't shy away from hits or answering the bell. I definitely enjoyed watching some of your highlights. I thought that was enjoyable, and it tells me a lot about you though, because then when I hear about as you get older, things are starting to happen playing hockey, and now I mean, God, I'm so sorry you went through this, but could you tell us a little bit about the accident and what happened?
yeah, so I was in my second year of junior A hockey in Vernon. Like I said, about 2 hours away from my hometown. And yeah, so I was always the kid, the young man that thought he was invincible, maybe like a lot of us, right? I just thought I was untouchable. I mean, I reflect back now, and part of it was feeding a young ego that like the attention. I was living up to that fighter stereotype. So for me, I was like the crazy guy that would just do stupid shit. And yeah, I kind of just really fed that ego, lived up to that stereotype, and thought I was invincible. And part of that was being a pyro. And so I was always messing around with gas and fire. And I was basically doing a spin-off of Molotov cocktails. So we were at our year-end party. Back then we would go party for like a week after the season, right? I don't know what the kids do now, but that's what we did. And we were camping, and I was filling up beer bottles full of gas, not a smart thing to do. I had done it the year before, and it's all fun and games till someone gets hurt, right? And that's what happened. So I ended up having 2 wine bottles full of gas that were in my sweater pocket, and I was kind of going around the party, getting everyone revved up and saying, hey, I'm going to blow these things up or whatever I was doing. And all of a sudden I was soaking wet. And so I had the bottoms of the bottles had hit. Thankfully, I wasn't near the fire. And so I just had 1.5 liters of gas spilled all over my torso. And probably 5 or so minutes go by, and I reek like gas. I'm like, I'm just going to throw this sweater, get it in the fire. Now I know obviously we were drinking. So my senses probably weren't where they, would have been otherwise, but I know there's a fire right there and that I shouldn't get too close, but I just didn't respect the dangers of gas and the vapors. And I was just a walking bomb. Right. And I thought I kept a safe distance from the fire as I threw it in, and kind of gave the ground a little kick, and it just up I went. And that's when everything changed. And unfortunately, I bolted into the woods, and that fight or flight kicks in. If the guys would have just tackled me right away, I mean, yeah, you've read that part of the story, right? Yeah, I just bolted, and that, like I said, it was probably the worst thing I could have done, but that natural instinct kicks in, and then I was just a running ball of fire.
Man, Aaron, that's like, I mean, even hearing you say it now, I get chills because it's so scary. And I could, even when I read about it, I could just picture it. So you're on fire. How eventually they obviously your fire's out, whatnot, and you wake up now, you're in the hospital now, right?
Yes. So I get tackled from behind, and I mean, the damage had been done by that point, but yeah, they ended up getting the fire. You had to smother a gas fire, right? And that was the problem. You can't just put out a gas fire. You need to smother it. And so finally we got it out. I was ass naked, sitting on a cooler in complete shock, right? I wasn't in any pain. That came later. And that's when I realized how serious it was because of people's reactions, right? Some people were crying, some people were screaming that, we got to get to a hospital, but so we had no service where we were. And so that's where there was a really a high sense of panic from everyone, because they're like, hey, this guy's pretty messed up. And that's when I started looking at my body, and that's when I realized, like, okay, this is serious. And so we thankfully, one of the guy's girlfriends wasn't drinking. So we got into her car and sped off to the hospital. And I ran into the hospital emergency room, ass naked at about whatever time it was, 1 or 2 a.m. And I always, like to try and make a little light of the situation, but, think of the emergency room in the middle of the night, right? You got maybe your guy that got beat up at the bar, he needs a couple stitches. You got a screaming baby. Maybe someone has some chest pains or whatever, right? Someone has a bad cough, and then in comes this guy who's totally naked, screaming, dirty, bleeding, charred, everything. And I can just imagine everyone was like, okay, you can help him. And so I was knocked out right when I ran in. That's when I don't remember until I woke up, the next day, very foggy in Vancouver. So I got airlifted to Vancouver a couple hours later that night, once I was stable and everything.
And Aaron, it ended up, I think what I read, I think it was you suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns over 40% of your body.
Yeah. Yeah. So those first few days, the burn, it's tricky when burn patients first go in, because the extent of the damage isn't fully known until, the doctors get a look, right? So they have an idea, but those burns, they don't, I guess, reach their peak. This is from what I remember anyways, in the I guess the science behind the injury. They don't fully reach the height of their damage until like day 3, day 4 kind of thing, right? So they knew I was pretty banged up, and then I came out of this first debridement procedure, which is a whole other type of torture. But that's when they relayed all right, you're 40% second, third degree burns. I mean, at that point, I'm close to 100% burnt. Like the rest of my body was like a really bad first degree burn, like a really, really bad sunburn kind of thing, right? Where it would blister, but it wasn't going to scar. And then, but the real damage was 40%. Yeah.
So, Aaron, I wanted to ask too, because I mean, I've been in the hospital before when I was younger. Nothing obviously as serious as this. I had broken my wrist, but I what what I found helpful is when seeing when my parents came in, even just with a broken wrist and how they reacted. Like, how does that hit? And what's the emotions like when you see when your parents come in and they see you and you see them?
Yeah, that was one of the hardest parts for me, was seeing the trauma and seeing my parents go through the trauma. So there's two different ways of experiencing trauma, and I've had both. Obviously, being in it, like, so when I was burnt, being in it, and like for the first couple days, it was really foggy. I don't remember a lot. Kind of just in a morphine sleep, essentially, right, for 2 days. But when you're in the shit, you're almost like just along for the ride in a way, and there's this odd sort of calmness to the whole thing. But I've been on the other side. I've been in my parents' shoes. I would argue, like, if you take away the physical pain, I would argue it's harder watching a loved one. I can't imagine your own child go through it. It's a very helpless feeling. I don't know if you've had anything like that, but for me, I've experienced both, and it's very different, and I think it's harder emotionally watching a loved one. So to see my parents, like, again, I just remember those first few days, I'd open up my eyes every few hours and there they were trying to keep it together. Right. And yeah, I almost felt worse about them, like how they were feeling in a way. Because again, for those first few days, no one really knew, like, he's stable, but is he going to live? What's the rest of his life going to look like? All these questions that they don't know. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I think they were there the whole time, the whole stay in the burn unit. They slept by my bed, the whole time I was there. They weren't really supposed to, but I mean, if I guess you get an idea of maybe what my family's like through the book, but they would have had to take my dad away in a police car to get him out of there. So yeah, they've always been very supportive in anything I've set out to do, including putting my body through defying doctors and going on that journey, supporting me through that. But yeah, just the trauma was tough for them, for sure. I mean, imagine getting that call. I can't, it's hard to put myself in my parents' shoes when they get that call that night. Your son's been in a very bad accident. He's getting airlifted to Vancouver, the burn unit in Vancouver. I just can't imagine what goes through your head at that time. So,
man, well, God bless them, man. God bless all you guys. I'm really glad that, obviously that they were there to support you. It sucks that they had to go through that, but I'm glad that ultimately it does start to have a happy ending. And I think what you're doing now, the rest of your story, I think you're really inspiring people and changing lives. So in that burn unit, when though, because you, just by reading the book, seeing some of your other interviews, man, you're determined as hell, man. Like, when do you all of a sudden, like, I don't care what you say, I'll be back on the ice, I'm going to play?
Yeah, that came about 2 weeks into my stay in the burn unit. So at that first conversation I had with the doctor, when he relays this, you're 40% second, third degree burns, you're going to be in here for a while. You're going to make a full recovery, but it's going to be a long road. And that's when, so this is again, maybe day 3. And I asked the doctor, the first thing that goes through my head was, okay, I have camp coming up in 3.5 months. it's my last year of junior eligibility, my last year to get a scholarship to the NCAA. And that was my dream. I still hadn't talked to one scout because, again, I wasn't really that good. They weren't recruiting fighters to the NCAA. You can't fight, right? And so I asked him this, and yeah, I'll never forget this moment. But he just kind of froze, and it was a look of, this poor kid thinks he's going to be playing hockey in a few months. And he just said, listen, these recoveries take years, not months. And you're not going to be playing hockey in a few months. Maybe down the road, we'll look at getting you in a pair of skates in a non-competitive environment. That was the dialogue. And so for me, my career was over at that time. And I was bummed and depressed. And I mean, aside from the physical pain every second, that's what I was going through. On the other hand, I was thankful that I was going to live a relatively normal life. My face wasn't going to be really scarred, and I was going to make a full recovery. But yeah, I was really trying to like balance those emotions. And in a way, I was, accepting of what I, had done to myself, and accepted the consequences of it in a way. And so going forward, 2 weeks into that stay in the burn unit, I get a call from my coach, my junior coach, and he said, I just got off the phone. I've been talking to one of the assistant coaches from Brown University, and they're looking for this type of player. And his exact words were, we want a guy to put the fear of God in the defenseman of the Ivy League. And I mean, that's what I did. I punished the defenseman on the other team. And my coach said, I got the perfect guy for you. There's just, one major problem. He's in the burn unit and the future doesn't look great. So my coach said, they want to talk to you, just call him. And so I'm trying to paint a picture for you, but I'm in the burn unit wrapped like a mummy. I can't move. And so my parents take down the number, they put the phone to my ear, and I talked to this coach from Brown University. And it was left really open-ended. And they just said, we're sorry to hear what happened. We wish you the best in recovery. And that was kind of it. And I remember they hung up the phone, and I'm laying there in the burn unit. I'm 2 weeks into my stay. I'm supposed to be in there all summer long. And I just think like, man, so at that time, I'm a couple weeks away from my 20th birthday, or a few weeks away. So I'm thinking, man, I've worked my whole life to talk to one of these guys, and finally it's happened. And look where I am. Look what I've done to myself. So that's when, I started getting emotional, and so that's when I started asking questions like, why can't I play hockey in a few months? And there was a lot of good reasons, right? There's this big list of reasons. I mean, infection was probably the biggest. I mean, I had open second-degree burns under my hockey gear for a while that year. They just would not heal. So that was probably the biggest reason. The skin grafts are going to be very limiting, very painful. I was going to be in a full bodysuit for 2 years. I couldn't sweat at that time because I still hadn't gotten the grafts done, right? So anytime you creep up to like that 40-50% grafted areas, you can't sweat from those areas. So there's potential complications with heart rate, right? And being able to sweat and all that. Anyway, so there's this big list of reasons, and I just made a choice that day that those weren't good enough reasons for me. At the end of the day, they were telling me it was going to hurt. And I thought, well, it can't be much worse than what I just went through for the last couple of weeks. That was a little bit naive thinking, but at the time, that's what my choice was. And yeah, I made a choice. I said to myself, I don't accept that diagnosis that you're, this gavel you've laid on me. And that's where, once I made that choice that I was going to go on this journey, people always ask me, how did you discover visualization? And as you've read, this is how, because I was bedridden in a hospital in the burn unit and I couldn't move. So all I could do was think. And the 2 weeks prior to that, it was all the negative shit, right? I mean, mostly how much it hurt and dealing with that, but really feeding that pain, right? And so once I made that choice, I started visualizing everything I wanted. And one was it reframing the pain. And I almost imagined that like my body was using it as fuel, and it was healing itself, which it is obviously, right? But just visualizing healing at like a cellular level, like I would just obsess all day that I was shrinking those grafted areas, my cells were becoming stronger. Visualize, walking out of that burn unit, the opening night in my season that fall, and just sit with the feeling of that comeback, and paint a picture and an experience in my head, and then I'd always end it with signing that commitment letter to Brown, and I would just live in that reality, and I essentially transported myself into a different reality and out of the physical one I was in, and it gave me a superpower. It really did. That's not to say it was easy, but it just gave me an extreme confidence in that journey and trust in the journey. And I mean, my body fought back with all it had that summer, I'll tell you that. But yeah, I mean, I did it and got out of that hospital within 6 weeks, which was a lot sooner than I was supposed to. But yeah, I mean, and then it opened up this whole world of possibility to what we're capable of, and the power of the mind, right?
Yeah, Aaron, it makes it even more, listening to you talk about what you had to go through. I saw a clip of you, and then hearing you now talk about everything you went through. And there was this clip that you literally sitting there and you say, the adversity was a gift.
Yeah.
And hearing you say that, though, like, I don't think people have a full appreciation, though, of what that really means, because hearing everything that you went through and you still say that's a gift, I mean, that just shows, I mean, obviously the visualization, but man, dude, your mental toughness is such a superpower, and it's inspiring for people. So you play, I'll fast forward a little bit. You played NCAA. Yeah. So, and like you said, you never thought you were going to play in the NHL. What's that like now that you have an opportunity and now you kind of make it? How's that feel?
Yeah, it was, I'll try and keep it somewhat short to not give the whole story away. But when I got to Brown, my perspective on life had changed. And for me, I had done it. Like, I reached my NHL. Once I got the scholarship, I shut it down for the season. And that's when I, tried to get healthy, because the doctors were right that recovery did take 2 years to fully heal. So when I got to Brown, I just, I worked my ass off and everything, sure. But, I just had fun, and I enjoyed being a student athlete. And I didn't really have the wherewithal to think like, hey, if I can do that, what else could I do? I was early 20s and just having a good time. Right. And that was it. And I was, after my junior year, I was 24 years old, and my assistant coach came up to me one day after the season had ended and just asked me, have you ever thought about playing pro hockey? And I think I laughed in his face, and I said, no, I mean, maybe like in passing, I've like, hey, it'd be cool to like go fight in the minors for a year to say I did it, but like, not really. Again, I was 24 years old. I was pre-med at Brown, and I was going to go down that road and do something with that. And he just said, I really think, if you worked on your game, you could have a good 5 to 10 year career in the American League, which is the league right below the NHL. And, maybe get a shot in the show one day if you worked on your game. And I didn't, again, I kind of was like, well, thank you. It was a nice compliment, and didn't think much of it. And that's when I got home that night, and I had another moment similar to the burn unit, where I was like, I was kind of like, hey, dummy, like, what have you been doing for these last few years? And then I thought, again, if I can do that, then, what else could I do? And I made a choice that day that I was going to play in the NHL, because I said, well, that seems easier than what I did, a few years back. And I had to go back to the mindset and the visualization and becoming obsessed. And that's where I got the idea of like writing this movie and visualizing it and living in that reality every single day of my life. And then, to fast forward, there's a lot more to it. Obviously, I made that movie come true. And again, it wasn't easy, but it gave me that obsession and trust that I was going to go there. So a long-winded answer, but to answer your question, that first game for me in the NHL was it was so surreal. I mean, everyone says that, but for me, it was so surreal because it was in Vancouver, and I was in the burn unit there 5 years prior to that moment, with not a thought of ever playing pro hockey, let alone the best league in the world, right? And so I go out to the ice for my first NHL game, and you got to remember, I had been visualizing that moment for probably thousands of times in my head over and over and over again. So I had already been there and I had already lived it. And I just had this moment, where I'm like, holy shit, like I did it again. Like I made this movie come true. So for me, it was just so surreal because typically in my mind, when I'd seen that, I guess you could say the credits rolled and I would open my eyes and I'd be like sitting where I am now or wherever, coming out of my visualization practice. And I'm like, okay, now I'm going in front of 20,000 screaming fans and it's going down for real now. And I had to kind of pinch myself, and it just gave me this insane appreciation for what I had been through. And again, you talk about adversity being a gift. Like I had at that moment of like a thank you, because I would have never made the NHL without this experience. There's no way. And so that's where that appreciation came in. And then I was going to live out a different movie, right? And so I had made that come true, but I had the wherewithal, okay, like what else is next, kind of thing, right? So it was very surreal for sure.
Yeah, man, that's amazing. So you end up having, you have a career in the NHL, and then, adversity is not done with you yet.
No.
So now what happens?
Yeah, that's putting it lightly, for me anyways. I mean, yeah, so my career was over because of a neck injury. So I had my spine fused and just wasn't able to come back. It's interesting because people ask me about that, and for me, so this was 10 years after the burn injury about. And with my burn injury, and I was also a lot younger, but I couldn't make that any worse, right? I mean, I could get an infection for sure, and I was going to deal with that when the time came. But the burns themselves, it's not like I could make the burn worse. Where with my neck injury, after I got that fusion and the pain and discomfort I was playing with, it was very well known that I could have severe complications if I hurt my neck again. And so I'm 30 and I'm about to start a family at the time, right? So I'm in a bit of a different mindset, but I learned to know when to turn that switch on and maybe when to keep it, off in that situation where I don't really want to have a life-changing neck injury and I can't pick up my kids, right? Versus that comeback from the burn injury. So they were different. But yeah, I mean, people always ask me, and part of the story is, I think I didn't realize this until after hockey, but that whole journey for me to the NHL was overcoming physical and mental adversity. And I was very good at that because I had experience with it, right? And learned how to overcome that. After hockey, shit hit the fan for me after hockey. Within a couple years after I retired from the NHL, I mean, the biggest thing, talking about a loss of identity. So I didn't know who was I supposed to be now, that's tough for all professional athletes, right? Especially when the game just gets taken from you like that. I didn't get to go out on my terms, right? It was just over, and now I got to figure out what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. I went through a divorce. My dad was sick. All these things, I was working a career I didn't love eventually, and I hit rock bottom. And so going back to, I say this often, where physical and mental adversity before hockey, I was very good at that. You give me a physical challenge, I'll overcome anything. And the mental piece associated with that. After hockey, I got thrust into the emotional and spiritual adversity that I was just a young boy in that maturity aspect. And I didn't know how to deal with any of that stuff. Right. And especially as hockey players and maybe men in general, I think it's changing now, thankfully, but we weren't taught to open up and talk about how we're feeling and say, hey, I just had these like 3 or 4 like major life-changing events and pieces of adversity emotionally and spiritually, but I'm not talking about them, and therefore I just spiral and hit rock bottom. And yeah, so life after hockey was arguably harder for me in a lot of different aspects. And thankfully, once I had this visualization practice, so I hit rock bottom. I was not in a good place, and I had another moment. So I've had very defining moments in my life where it's like one day and I make a choice and I have this like fork in the road, say. And again, thankfully, I've had those experiences prior to these last few after hockey. But I just had a moment with my son, who was 2 at the time. And, I just said, okay, no more. And I had to go back to what I knew about the mindset and the visualization. And it's just, for me, like every time I've gone back to that, everything changes. And the universe just, it sends energy my way. And I don't think that's an accident. I mean, I know it's not, but right. And it just works in crazy ways. And so after that moment, everything changed. And then that was the last time I didn't practice visualization, if that makes sense. So because it's given me so much. And so I always tell people, it got me out of the burn unit, a scholarship to Brown. I made the NHL because of this practice, but it also saved my life after hockey. And that's why I'm so passionate about teaching it. Because yeah, it's been such a monumental piece for me. And so now I practice it daily because it's taken me a few times to realize that how important it is. That just comes with time, I guess, for some of us. But yeah, that's a long-winded answer to, after hockey. It's been very different, but arguably, harder in ways.
Aaron, I really appreciate you opening up about that because, I mean, I talk to a lot of people, and part of the network I'm involved with, the NGBN network, we talk all the time about, especially as men, like we really don't like to open up about things, right? And
Yeah.
I think somebody like you, professional athlete who's been through so much, to even talk about that, the emotional aspects, and that you still ended up, most people would say, Aaron, you had 40% burn over your whole body. Like, and you're saying after hockey is when you hit your rock bottom. But I mean, I think it shows that none of us are immune to it. And we need to be very conscious of it, and that there's other people out there. It doesn't matter whether professional athlete, somebody who's, just an everyday guy. I mean, we all are dealing with something, and,
Yeah.
we need to work through it, and we need to talk about it. So thank you definitely for opening up about that. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I think adversity is relative, right? We're, like you said, we're all going to go through it. So to have techniques to help with that. And I always say, adversity is inevitable. We're all going to go through it, and it can be a gift if you give it that space. It won't seem like it in the moment, but visualization and these practices can help you unwrap that gift, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Because again, I think you look back one day and be thankful for it. So
Yeah, I agree, Aaron. I mean, I think at the end of the day, for all of us, I mean, a lot of us, I know I was guilty of this, and it's people like you and others that I've seen that finally it helped me, right? It was that I think I was in that phase of just feeling sorry for myself. And then when I finally said, you know what, it's just a matter of, we all have something to deal with it and work through it. I mean, that's what ultimately helps. So as far as I want to kind of end with this, as far as your visualization practice and things like that, How can people get in touch with you if they need help with that kind of thing? Is there a place where they can go to find you for that?
Yeah, definitely. Just head to my website, aaronvolpatti.com. Lots of info about everything that we've talked about, but also the different programs I have. So I actually am in the process of transitioning all these programs to live online. So there'll be different programs people can access because, so I've been doing this for a couple of years now, and yeah, I don't have time, unfortunately, to work one-on-one with all these people. And so for part of it was for me to, to just reach more people and have this accessible, because it does make such a big difference. And to have, to turn people away, I want to obviously help as many people as I can. So that was a big part of it. So I'm just in the process of getting that all built out, because like I said, it's just been my one-on-one programs in the past. That being said, I do have space, limited space until that time comes. So yeah, if people have interest, they can just reach out to me, go read up on info on the website. So
yeah, I would highly recommend it for everyone, Aaron. And Aaron's book, trust me, his book Fighter, you definitely want to check that out. I'll put the links in the show notes so that people
awesome.
can hopefully grab that either on Kindle or hard copy. And I mean, Aaron, you are an amazing inspiration, and I am so glad that I stumbled across your book online, man. I really am happy and appreciate it. And I can't thank you enough for giving me some time today. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. Thanks for having me on. I love doing these things, and it's just really cool to, I put this book out there and to have people reach out and, resonate or relate with the story in some way and make a difference and empower people. I mean, that's why I did it. And yeah, to make an impact on people's lives and connect, people like you and I, it's really cool. So I mean, I love talking about all this stuff. So I appreciate it. And yeah, it was a good chatting.
Yeah, thank you again. So everyone, please check out Aaron's website, look for his book, and thank you for tuning into this episode. Really appreciate it.
This has been
Take
the
care.
Bear
Bye.
Essentials. Thanks for listening. And remember, never hibernate on your goals.